So obviously with our focus on labor efficiency as a key driver of business performance, it obviously leads into discussions about compensation and what are the best techniques. And granted, you're going to find all different manners of things as it comes down to, should somebody be salaried, hourly, overtime? Should you treat them as a contractor? Should you treat them as an employee? Those are sometimes legal issues as well as motivational issues. But let's take a step back and go even further, because when you really look at it, as we study it, there's really some conflicting information when you look at the researchers in terms of what is compensation in terms of a motivator. And so one of the people that I turn to a good bit is Adam Grant, who wrote a book called Give and Take. He's a Wharton Business School professor, and he did a study relative to basketball, and so he used that as a concept. And he found that teams with unequal pay won fewer games when pay differences were not connected to performance, but they won more games when the differences in pay were based on players' contributions. And so the idea is performance tends to wane when, that there is unequal pay, that there's a sense of lack of fairness, in that process. There's also a sense of performance degradation as well, though, when everybody's paid the same number, because I think as humans, we are drawn to celebrate our uniqueness. And I think there's a way that I can get both uniqueness as well as equitability in this process. So what Adam really discovered in this idea that I really like is this idea that equity matters more than equality. And so essentially what you're trying to strive for, we use this term of pay equality, which probably is a pretty weak term, and it actually doesn't accomplish what I believe everybody is trying to accomplish, which is equitability. For those who produce more, they should make more. For those that produce less, they should make less. Now, if you don't agree with that concept, then you can stop watching this video now, because we won't agree on that concept. But in business, that's pretty much the basis that we look at it, and we want to be as fair as possible. And you don't want to create a situation where the payor or the payee, one party is unfairly enriching themselves, off the benefit of the other. And so what they found was that as long as there's a fairness idea in these differences of pay, that the vast majority of well-thinking team members actually consider that okay. So if the star player is being paid a lot, but they also deliver in the clutch and they consistently perform and all those kind of things, people are good with it. But it's when that star player is paid a lot and they don't really do a lot. And it's one of those things that sometimes the doing a lot might be commonly seen versus is it they're doing a lot, you just don't know about it. Well, that's a communication issue, from that. So we're not really looking at that from that standpoint. But I think really the idea is you want to understand and create a culture to where as people are paid more, there is more production required. You're doing your part in terms of moving pricing along and all those kind of things as well. But you're creating this concept of equitability, not equality. So really, the way that we approach this is what we recommend is creating your own internal wage scale. So think of it like this, in a sense that you look at all the relative positions that you have in your business, and you essentially create a market for those positions. Now, you may start off thinking, well, how would I know that? Well, actually, believe it or not, the data is more available than you may think. We actually subscribe to a well-respected wage survey system called Economic Research Institute's Salary Assessor. And so we do a lot of wage survey polls for our clients that will actually look at by position, by years of experience, by business size, by SIC code, by location. So you look at all of those factors, and we help people set those wage scales when they're diligent enough to actually identify them and look at that process. And then anytime that you have two people within the same type of a role, you can then look at it from this perspective of comparing those people's performance. Now, you always have to look at that a little differently, because I have people that are essentially in the same role, but they do not work on the same projects, they do not work on the same clients. And so therefore you have to apply some good judgment in the cases of where did everybody get the same opportunity to perform at the same level. If we're all working a station in a factory and Fred produced 15 widgets and I produced 12, well, Fred's actually more productive than I am. He was more focused. Well, that's pretty easy to calculate. But the vast majority of businesses, the answers are not that clear. But across time, it still is worthy to measure it, look at it, and use that intuitive judgment to evaluate the differences in that process. You can also look at evaluating total team performance. There really is a lot of value still to management by walking around. And I think as you are available and you see how people work and how they interact, it's pretty easy to determine that in the function of a team, I can look at it and say, which team is performing better? And do I have better teammates and a weak leader? Or in some cases, I got a great leader, but I've given them a weak team to work on. And so in that case, you can usually balance those things out. But the mere act of measuring it starts to give you a contextual framework where you can look at it and say, when are they at their best, when they're at their weakest? And you've got this ebb and flow cycle of business activities as well, because you're not always constantly working at the same level of that process. And then you start to look at, when I have this wage scale, when our process, we look at time to adjust people's wages, the first thing that we look at is we ask ourselves, has the wage scale changed? And so before I get into individual performance and confusing a person's improvement and moving up a level in terms of their pay grade, well, maybe the market has actually already moved up. And so realistically, you've got to look at it from a standpoint, there's only two reasons why somebody should get a raise. The market went up and I stayed doing the same thing. That's still worthy of a raise. Or two, the person moved up a skill level and they should get a raise as well. And so they could potentially benefit from both aspects. So from this standpoint, one of my huge pet peeves is cost of living adjustments is a term that should forever be removed from discussing pay. Because realistically, my cost of living has nothing to do with what I should get paid. If I'm doing a poor job and I get fired, my cost of living, I may immediately say, well, my cost of living doesn't go down. Well, it will eventually because I'm unemployed. I have no money. And so once you start to understand the discretionary choices in life of what you choose to spend your money on, you'll start to realize that cost of living actually is a discretionary item. And ultimately, the market discussing taking cost of living out of the equation and discussing what the market wage is for that position. Because if you really look across the continuum of all the different wage types, there are certain wage types. If you're in cybersecurity programming, your wages are rising so rapidly, it's just insane compared to a person who's doing lawn care. Now, believe it or not, the guy doing lawn care, their wages are going up as well, because there's actually not enough people, and it takes a rising wage to create demand of the good workers who are willing to do that job, and it needs to be an acceptable wage for that level. And so as you start to see this economic output of what happens, it starts to create a fairness doctrine in the sense of that wage, the market wage goes up, but then so do all the levels in that pay structure in that process. So really the idea is it gives you the ability to clearly communicate to the employee of what goes on in terms of why are they getting a raise. So this leads to, I developed this chart to help people understand this concept across time. And so this is what I call the career labor efficiency curve. Now, I will warn you, there are some cruel elements in this curve. And the first cruelty is the fact that you as a business owner, many times in that beginning stage of hiring someone, that what you pay a person is above what the person's output is. And so at that moment, that's what we call the training zone. And so whether that is a day, a week, 2 months, 2 years, 3 years, take your pick. At that point, that person is not paying for themselves and you're having to make an investment in the development of that skill set. Now, in many positions, you can structure it in a way that I'm making some money off of that person so I get to an above market level as quickly as possible. and then I continue to develop that person. Well, once you get to where what that person is producing for you is above their wage, that's what we call the transition into what I call the chasing zone. And this is where most of us live throughout most of our working career. And I call it the chasing zone for this reason, that I firmly believe that your pay should chase your performance, not the other way around. In the training zone, my performance is chasing my pay because my pay is above my performance in that regard. Once I flip over and go into the chasing zone of being a productive employee, now as I prove that I produce, my pay chases it. So go back to the NFL example. In the NFL, generally most of the contracts are based on one-year contracts. They do some games and stuff with bonuses and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, anybody in the professional sports arena, what you produce then establishes your next pay rate. And they hope that that keeps going. And at whatever point that your pay rate exceeds what you produce, you're probably looking for another team somewhere. And so throughout this chasing zone, you can see on the chart that the pay is continually chasing your performance, and then you hit this peak. Now, before people start to scream about discrimination and all of those kind of things, this is not about time. This is about performance. And I don't care how old you are. I don't care, what it is, what job that you're doing. At the end of the day, there's a harsh economic concept called when you produce less and you want more pay, it's not economically sustainable. And so in this process, I'm a huge fan of continuous learning. This was driven into me by my mom that, she was in college getting her nursing degree when I was in college. She had 4 degrees in her lifetime. And so it really kind of seeded with me this idea that you never, ever, ever stop learning. You never, ever stop learning how to produce more at a higher value. And at the point that you do stop that, there's a good chance that your economic potential is going to decline. Now, it doesn't mean there's still things of value that you can do, but the business that's paying it can no longer pay at that rate. And so this is really to where it creates the third phase of what I call the replacement zone. Now, it doesn't have to be a replacement zone if everybody's open and honest about that process. There is going to be a point that I do not want to produce, whether it's conflicted by ability or desire, that as my production declines, I should make less. That's just an economic reality. Now, if both parties, the payor and me, are realistic about it, then we can work out an arrangement. And you see this in professional sports. There's guys that take a discount to continue playing ball because they shift from being a starter to being one of the backups or a role player, as we say. And so that's perfectly fine in that process. It's something that nobody really likes to talk about, but it's a harsh reality. And I believe that there are many good players, as in employees, that could stay on the same team and make a significant contribution, but everybody has to be open and honest about what is that contribution worth? I just always go back to market. What is that market value of the thing that I'm doing, and what can I afford to pay? And all of the sum of all those actions across all of the employees has to equal the same net output, that we can all come up to. Otherwise, you've got an economic, situation that, just will never work in that process. So granted, it is a situation that can be harsh, but there again, I think what you will find is that if you're open and honest and you look at it and you have this idea of going back to the simple principle, market wage for market performance, I think everybody will essentially settle into what is best for all parties involved.